Welcome to 10 Chapters Audiobooks. Stories that are short enough to finish, deep enough to feel.
Seasons of Emma, Chapter 1, Winter Blues. The snow fell in lazy spirals, blanketing the city in a deceptive calm that seemed to soften the edges of everything. Emma Rivers tightened her scarf around her neck as the icy wind snuck through her coat collar, sharp as a blade. She glanced at the time on her phone. 9:43 p.m. Another blind date. Another wasted evening. Was it really that bad? Maya's voice rang in her head, teasing and unrelenting, as if her best friend were walking beside her instead of texting her 3 hours ago. Emma could almost see Maya's grin, the tilt of her head as she'd pushed Emma toward tonight's disaster. "You never know, he might be the one," Maya had said, her optimism annoyingly infectious. But Emma had known better. The gut feeling had been right again. "He talked about his crypto portfolio for 45 minutes, Emma muttered to herself, her boots splashing through a half-frozen slush puddle. She could feel her socks dampening. Perfect. "And then he called me Emily, twice." The thought made her clench her teeth. She hadn't corrected him the second time. What was the point? At least there'd been a free glass of wine. Small victories, she supposed. A sharp gust of wind cut through the street, making her shiver. She pulled her coat tighter, but it wasn't enough to keep the chill or the loneliness out. Manhattan always felt lonelier in the winter. The snow, beautiful as it was, seemed to muffle the city's usual cacophony. Tonight, the streets were unusually quiet, save for the occasional rumble of a taxi or the distant hum of traffic. Most people were inside by now, tucked away in warm apartments or cozy bars, their windows glowing softly like tiny promises of sanctuary. Emma hated this feeling. She hated the ache in her chest when she saw couples huddling close under shared umbrellas or laughing as they dodged puddles. Their joy seemed so effortless, so unreachable. She forced her gaze to the pavement, quickening her pace as if she could outrun the thoughts creeping in. Her mind wandered to her apartment. Pickles, her cat, would be waiting, probably sitting atop the radiator or glaring at her from his perch by the window. The image made her smile faintly. Pickles was her one constant, her grudging companion through endless late nights of sketching or binge-watching shows she'd already seen twice. But the thought of going home felt heavier tonight. The silence of her one-bedroom apartment wasn't the comforting kind. It was the sort that amplified every doubt, every insecurity, every what-if she tried to ignore during the day. She turned the corner on impulse, her boots crunching against the fresh snow. Elliot's Cafe came into view, its warm glow spilling onto the street like a beacon. She hesitated for a moment, but the cold and the thought of a steaming cup of tea pushed her forward. She reached for the door, the small bell above it chiming softly as she stepped inside. The cafe was as familiar as a favorite book, every detail etched into her memory. The walls, painted a deep, comforting green, were adorned with mismatched frames of vintage postcards and quirky sketches. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the buttery scent of pastries, wrapping around Emma like a hug. A couple of night owls sat at scattered tables, hunched over laptops or flipping through notebooks. "Oh, Emma!" Danny's voice broke through the quiet. The barista's green hair peeked out from under a knit beanie, and her friendly grin was as warm as the cafe itself. "Usual?" Emma nodded, managing a tired smile. "Please." "Rough night?" Danny asked, sliding a mug under the espresso machine. "You could say that." Emma leaned against the counter briefly, watching as Danny prepared her drink. The soft whir of the machine was oddly soothing. Danny didn't press for details, just handed Emma her mug of peppermint tea with a wink. "Here, on the house. You look like you need it." Emma's smile grew a little more genuine. "Thanks, Danny." She carried the mug to her favorite corner table by the window. It was a small table, just big enough for her drink and her ever-present sketchbook. From this spot, she could see the street outside and let the world pass her by without demanding anything from her. The tea warmed her hands as she held the mug, letting the steam curl up into her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the cafe. There was a comfort in the familiarity of it all, the scrape of chairs against the floor, the low murmur of conversations, the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, she opened her sketchbook and picked up her pencil. The motion was almost automatic, her hand moving across the page as her thoughts began to untangle. Tonight, she sketched the scene outside the cafe, the way the snow swirled under the streetlights, the blurred glow of headlights, the quiet stillness of parked cars dusted with white. Drawing always brought her a sense of clarity, a way to process emotions she didn't fully understand. She became so absorbed in the rhythm of her pencil strokes that she didn't notice the man sitting at the next table until he spoke. "That's beautiful." Her pencil slipped, leaving a faint smudge across the page. She looked up, startled. The man was watching her, his expression curious but gentle. He looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges of his knit beanie. His jawline was sharp, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her pause. "Sorry," he said quickly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't mean to scare you." It's fine," Emma replied, her cheeks warming. She glanced at her drawing, suddenly self-conscious. "I just didn't see you there." "You're really good," he said, nodding toward her sketch. "The way you captured the light on the snow, it's impressive." "Thanks," Emma said, closing the sketchbook with a shy smile. She wasn't used to compliments from strangers. "Yours looks amazing, too," she added, nodding toward the open sketchbook on his table. Its pages were filled with intricate cityscapes, each one brimming with detail and life. The man shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's just a hobby," he said, though the precision of his lines told a different story. Before Emma could respond, he glanced at his watch and stood up. "I have to go," he said, tucking his sketchbook under his arm. "But keep drawing. The city needs more of that." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the snowy night. Emma stared after him, baffled. Her gaze fell on the table he'd just vacated, and her heart skipped a beat. A worn leather sketchbook sat there, forgotten. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edges of the cover. Should she run after him? But curiosity won. When she flipped it open, her breath caught. The pages were filled with stunning illustrations, skylines, crowded subways, street performers frozen mid-motion. Each one seemed alive, as if the city itself had spilled onto the pages. Toward the middle of the book, she found a sketch of Elliot's Cafe, its warm light spilling onto the snowy street. In the bottom corner, a single line of text was written in small, neat handwriting. "Some places hold the echoes of what we're searching for." Emma stared at the words, her chest tightening with an inexplicable sense of wonder. She glanced toward the door, but the man was long gone. All she could see was the snow, falling faster now, smudging the edges of the world like a half-finished sketch. For the first time that night, Emma smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. Maybe this evening wasn't a total waste after all. End of Chapter 1. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 2. The Sketchbook. The next morning, the city had transformed. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, blanketing the streets in a pristine, undisturbed white. The usual sharp edges of New York seemed softened, muted, as if the city itself had taken a deep breath and paused. Emma stood by her apartment window, coffee warming her hands, watching the world stir to life. The rhythmic crunch of tires over snow and the faint scrape of shovels carried through the air. Pedestrians shuffled along the sidewalks, their heads bowed against the cold, bundled in scarves and thick coats. It was a rare, fleeting stillness, and for a moment, Emma let herself sink into it. Her eyes drifted to the kitchen counter, where the sketchbook sat. Its leather cover caught the pale winter light, a stark contrast to the clean white of her countertop. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about it, or the stranger who had left it behind. I shouldn't have opened it, she thought, guilt flickering in her chest. But curiosity had taken hold last night, and the images she had found inside still lingered in her mind. They weren't just drawings. They were windows into another world, another mind. Emma set her coffee down and crossed the room. Her fingers brushed the sketchbook's cover as she picked it up, the leather smooth and warm from the morning sun. She hesitated, her heart racing slightly, then flipped it open. The first drawing greeted her like an old friend. A street vendor, his face lit with a warm, toothy smile, handed a hot dog to a child bundled in a puffy coat. The scene was alive with detail, the steam rising from the cart, the child's tiny mittens, the faint reflection of the vendor's silhouette on the wet pavement. The artist had captured not just the image, but the energy, the emotion of the moment. Emma turned the pages slowly, each one more mesmerizing than the last. A saxophonist in the subway, eyes closed, lost in his music. The Brooklyn Bridge bathed in moonlight, its reflection rippling in the East River. A woman waiting at a crosswalk, her scarf trailing in the wind. The sketches were alive, vibrant, brimming with a kind of love for the world that Emma found both beautiful and heartbreaking. Near the back of the sketchbook, she found the portraits. The same young woman appeared again and again, a muse, it seemed, for the artist. Her dark curls framed a mischievous smile, her eyes bright with some secret joy. In one drawing, she sat on a park bench, laughing, her head thrown back, as if the world had told her the best joke. In another, she leaned against a fire escape, her expression soft and wistful, gazing out over the city. Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. Whoever this woman was, she had clearly been important to the artist. The tenderness in the lines, the way her features were drawn with such care, it all spoke of a connection that went beyond mere observation. Finally, Emma reached the last page. The phrase was there, scrawled in delicate handwriting. Some places hold the echoes of what we're searching for. Her fingers traced the words, as if the act might bring her closer to their meaning. "What are you searching for, Leo?" she thought. "And why does it feel like I'm part of it?" The thought startled her, and she snapped the sketchbook shut. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. But the idea lingered, refusing to be dismissed. By the time the afternoon sun began to melt the edges of the snow, Emma had made up her mind. She bundled up in her thickest coat and scarf, pulled on her boots, and tucked the sketchbook into her bag. She would return it. Someone who poured so much of themselves into their work would be devastated to lose it, and she couldn't bear the thought of keeping it any longer. The icy sidewalks made the short walk to Elliot's cafe feel like an adventure. Snow crunched beneath her boots, and the cold bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too preoccupied with rehearsing what she might say if she saw him again. The cafe was warm and inviting, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Emma pushed open the door, and the familiar chime of the bell above the frame greeted her. The rich aroma of coffee and baked goods enveloped her like a hug, but she barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the man who had left behind the sketchbook. He wasn't there. Disappointment settled in her chest like a stone as she approached the counter. Danny, the barista, looked up from wiping a tray and grinned. "Hey, back again?" Emma hesitated, her fingers brushing the strap of her bag. "Yeah, I have a weird question. Do you know a guy who comes in here a lot? Dark hair, kind of scruffy, always sketching?" Danny tilted her head, her brow furrowing in thought. You just described half our regulars, she said with a laugh. Got anything more specific? Emma smiled nervously and pulled the sketchbook from her bag, placing it on the counter. He left this here last night. Danny's eyes widened as she took in the book. Oh my God, that's his, isn't it? That's Leo's. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Leo, she repeated softly. The name felt right, familiar somehow. Do you know him? Danny nodded. Yeah, he's in here all the time. Quiet guy. Orders black coffee, sits in the corner by the window, and sketches for hours. Doesn't talk much unless you start the conversation. Emma followed Danny's gesture to a table near the back, now empty. She could picture him there, head bent over the sketchbook, pencil moving deftly across the page. Do you know when he might be back? Danny shrugged. Hard to say. Sometimes he's here every day for weeks, and then he disappears for a while. He's unpredictable like that. Her gaze shifted to the sketchbook, and her expression softened. That thing's his whole world, you know. It's like his soul on paper. The weight of Danny's words settled over Emma, heavy and profound. She tightened her grip on the book. I was going to leave it here with you, but you can't, Danny finished for her, smirking. Let me guess, you feel like you need to give it back in person. Emma nodded, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. I don't know why, but yeah. Danny's smirk widened. Well, good luck. If I see him, I'll let him know you have it. Back home, the sketchbook sat on the coffee table like an unspoken challenge. Emma tried to distract herself answering work emails, scrolling through her phone, even cleaning out the fridge, but nothing worked. Her thoughts kept circling back to Leo and the world he had created within those pages. The snow outside had turned to slush, and the city lights cast long golden reflections on the wet pavement. Emma curled up on the couch, Pickles purring softly in her lap, and stared at the book. It felt heavier now, as if it carried not just Leo's art, but a piece of his life. Finally, she reached for it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it again, flipping through the pages with newfound reverence. Each drawing seemed more alive than before, as if the emotions behind them were seeping into her own heart. The laughter of the street vendor, the music of the saxophonist, the quiet strength of the young woman, all of it felt like a thread pulling her closer to something she couldn't quite see. And then, at the very back of the book, she noticed something she hadn't before. Faint, almost invisible against the dark leather of the inside back cover, were a name and an address, written in pencil. Leo Winters, 207 Walker Street. Her breath caught in her throat. The address wasn't far. Maybe a 20-minute walk, 30 if the sidewalks were still icy. Her heart raced as she traced the faint letters with her finger, her mind spinning with possibilities. This was it. She could return the sketchbook, solve the mystery, and finally put this strange chapter behind her. But as she sat there, staring at the address, a new thought crept into her mind. What if this isn't the end? What if it's just the beginning? The weight of the question pressed down on her, heavy and undeniable. She glanced at Pickles, who had stretched out across her lap, his green eyes gleaming in the dim light. Well, Pickles, she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Looks like we're going on an adventure. The cat blinked at her, his tail flicking lazily, as if to say, it's about time. End of Chapter 2. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 3, A Spring Encounter. Weeks passed, and the memory of the mysterious stranger lingered in Emma's mind like a song she couldn't shake. She'd returned to Elliot's cafe several times, sketchbook in tow, hoping to see Leo again. Each time, the seat by the window remained empty, and Danny could only offer a sympathetic shrug. Maybe he's a ghost, Danny joked one afternoon, wiping down the counter. just passing through to haunt unsuspecting artists. Emma laughed, but the idea unsettled her. What if she never saw him again? What if he was just a fleeting moment, destined to fade like a half-remembered dream? The thought left her feeling oddly deflated. The sketchbook now sat on her bookshelf, waiting for its owner to claim it, or for Emma to work up the courage to track him down. On a warm evening in late April, Maya dragged Emma to a gallery opening in Soho. The air was alive with the first hints of spring, and the streets buzzed with the hum of people shedding their winter layers. The gallery itself was a small but vibrant space, buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses as well-dressed patrons admired the art on display. Emma wasn't particularly in the mood for socializing, but Maya had insisted. "You need to get out more," Maya said, handing Emma a glass of white wine. "Who knows? You might meet someone interesting." Emma rolled her eyes, sipping her wine. "I've had enough of meeting people, thanks." As they moved through the gallery, Emma found herself drawn to a large painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. It was breathtaking, the colors vibrant and alive, the brushstrokes bold yet deliberate. The painting had an energy, a sense of movement that made it feel as if the sun were rising before her eyes. Something about it felt familiar, like she'd seen it before, but she couldn't place where. "That one's stunning, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Emma turned, her heart skipping. There he was. Leo, the stranger from the cafe. He looked different now, less bundled against the cold, wearing a fitted black jacket that emphasized his lean frame. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his sharp eyes held a flicker of recognition as they met hers. "It's you!" she blurted out before she could stop herself. He smiled, a slow, easy smile that lit up his face. "You remember me?" Yeah," Emma stammered, heat rising to her cheeks. "You left your sketchbook at Elliot's." His expression shifted, surprise and relief washing over him. "You found it? I've been wondering where I left it." "I have it," Emma said quickly. "I've been going back to the cafe, hoping to return it to you." Leo's smile softened. "Well, I guess this is fate, then." Before Emma could reply, a woman approached, clipboard in hand. "Leo, we need you up front for the Q&A." He nodded. "Be right there." Turning back to Emma, he said, "Don't go anywhere. I want to talk more." Emma blinked, still processing the revelation. He was the artist. The gallery was showcasing his work. Maya appeared at her side, wide-eyed and clutching her wine glass like a lifeline. "Holy crap, that's Leo Carter?" Maya whispered, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "He's incredible. His stuff is in all the big galleries right now, like New York Times kind of big." Emma stared after him, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this, the quiet stranger from the cafe turning out to be someone so accomplished, so out of her league. When the Q&A ended, Leo returned to find Emma near the refreshment table. He looked more at ease now, his shoulders relaxed. The weight of the evening lifted. "Sorry about that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The gallery loves making me talk about my work." "You were great," Emma said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. She'd listened intently to his answers, drawn in by the way he spoke about finding inspiration in small, overlooked moments. His voice had carried the same quiet passion that she'd seen in the pages of his sketchbook. "So," Leo said, his tone light, "how much of my sketchbook did you read?" Emma flushed. "Just enough to know you're ridiculously talented." He chuckled, the sound warm and unguarded. "It's not exactly light reading, but I'm glad you held on to it. I'd hate to lose those drawings." "I can bring it to you tomorrow," Emma offered. "Elliot's?" Leo shook his head, pulling a small gallery postcard from his pocket. "How about my art workshop? It's just a few blocks from here. You can see where I work and maybe join in." Emma blinked. Join in? Sure, it's a group thing. Beginners welcome. He grinned, his confidence infectious. No pressure, of course, but I think you'd enjoy it. The idea caught her off guard. Emma loved sketching, but her art had always been private, a way to process her emotions in solitude. Sharing it with others, even strangers, felt terrifying. But as she looked at Leo, something about his easy confidence, his openness, made her want to take the leap. She nodded slowly. Okay, why not? Leo's smile widened, his face lighting up. Great, here's the address. He scribbled it on the back of the postcard and handed it to her. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. As Emma left the gallery with Maya, her thoughts were a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. She'd gone from trying to return a forgotten sketchbook to stepping into Leo Carter's world. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might be stepping into something bigger than herself. The next day, Emma spent the morning in a daze. Her thoughts alternated between the memory of Leo's easy smile and the looming prospect of the workshop. She doubted her skills, worried about being judged, but a part of her, a quiet, persistent voice, urged her to go. By the time evening came, Emma stood outside the address Leo had given her. The building was an old brick warehouse with tall windows that glowed warmly against the dusky sky. She hesitated, clutching the sketchbook to her chest, before taking a deep breath and stepping inside. The workshop space was open and inviting, with long tables covered in art supplies, easels lining the walls, and a faint scent of paint lingering in the air. A handful of people milled about, chatting and setting up their materials. Leo was at the far end of the room, speaking with a woman who looked like she could be a professional curator. When he spotted Emma, his face lit up. Hey, you made it! She managed a nervous smile. Yeah, I brought this. She held out the sketchbook. Leo took it with a look of genuine gratitude. Thank you. I'm glad it found its way back to me. He opened it, flipping through the pages with a fond expression. I'd forgotten how much I'd sketched in here. I didn't peek too much, Emma said quickly, feeling a need to clarify. He grinned. You're welcome to. Art is meant to be shared after all. Emma wasn't sure she agreed, but she didn't argue. Leo introduced her to the group, a mix of amateurs and experienced artists, all welcoming in their own way. Over the next 2 hours, Emma found herself sketching alongside them, her initial nerves giving way to a quiet focus. The room buzzed with creativity, and for the first time, she felt the joy of sharing her passion in a community. Leo occasionally walked around, offering advice and encouragement. When he stopped by her table, he studied her work with a thoughtful smile. You have a great eye for detail, he said. Don't be afraid to experiment, though. Art is as much about play as it is about precision. Emma nodded, letting his words sink in. She tried loosening her strokes, letting the lines flow more freely. And for the first time, her sketches felt alive, imbued with a sense of motion and emotion that surprised even her. By the end of the evening, Emma felt lighter, like she'd shed a layer of fear she hadn't even realized she was carrying. As the group packed up, Leo walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, he said, his tone warm and genuine. I hope you'll join us again. Emma looked at him, her heart fluttering. I think I will. As she stepped out into the crisp spring night, she couldn't help but smile. Something had shifted, like the sun rising over a new horizon. Emma felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. End of Chapter 3. Don't forget to like and subscribe for free audiobooks. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 4. Summer of Sparks. The studio smelled of paint, paper, and the faint scent of sawdust. Emma hesitated just inside the door, taking in the high ceilings and sunlight streaming through tall windows. The walls were lined with half-finished canvases, charcoal sketches pinned to corkboards, and shelves cluttered with jars of brushes and paint tubes. A dozen or so people were scattered throughout the space, setting up easels and chatting, their voices a low hum beneath the warm buzz of creativity. "Emma!" Leo called from across the room, his voice cutting through her hesitation. His face lit up in a way that made her stomach flip. "Come on in." She smiled nervously, clutching the strap of her bag. "This place is incredible." "Thanks. It's a bit chaotic, but that's how I like it." He walked over, gesturing toward a table piled with supplies. "Grab whatever you need. Paper, pencils, charcoal, whatever speaks to you." Emma scanned the options, overwhelmed by the variety. She picked up a sketch pad and a few pencils, feeling like an imposter among these artists who seemed so at home in the space. Leo must have noticed her hesitation because he touched her shoulder lightly. "Relax. It's not a competition," he said, his voice kind and grounding. "Just draw what feels right." Emma nodded, finding a spot near the back of the room. She set up her materials, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her sketch pad. The noise of the studio faded into the background as she focused on the blank page. Slowly, she began to sketch her favorite subject, Elliot's Cafe. She started with the windows, the glow of the interior, and the people inside. Her pencil moved more confidently with each stroke, the familiar scene coming to life under her hand. By the time she looked up, nearly an hour had passed. The hum of the room felt distant, like she was in her own little world. Leo was walking around the studio, offering encouragement to the other artists. When he reached her table, he paused, leaning down to get a closer look at her drawing. "You did this just now?" he asked, his tone impressed. Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just a sketch." "It's amazing," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "You've got a great eye for light and detail. Seriously, this is professional-level work." Emma laughed softly, brushing off the compliment. "I just draw for fun." Leo shook his head. "You're way too talented to keep this to yourself. Have you ever thought about doing an exhibition?" She blinked, caught off guard. "An exhibition? Me? No. "Why not?" he asked, his tone earnest, almost challenging. "You have a unique perspective, Emma. People would connect with your work." His words lingered in her mind for the rest of the session. No one had ever spoken about her art like that before. It wasn't just praise, it was belief, and it stirred something in her she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. After the workshop, Leo invited her to grab coffee. They ended up at a quiet little cafe a few blocks from the studio, sitting across from each other in a booth. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed, a perfect contrast to the humid summer evening outside. "So, how long have you been sketching?" Leo asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Since I was a kid," Emma said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's always been my way of processing things. I guess I never thought I was good enough to do anything with it." Leo frowned, his expression thoughtful. "That's nonsense. You're talented, Emma. You just need to give yourself a chance." She sipped her iced tea, unsure how to respond. The truth was, his belief in her felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. "What about you? Have you always been an artist?" "Pretty much," he said with a small smile, his eyes distant as if recalling memories. "I started with graffiti when I was a teenager, got into trouble for it a few times, but then I had a teacher who saw potential and pushed me toward more traditional mediums. Eventually, I fell in love with painting and sketching." Emma studied him, intrigued. "And now you're here, running workshops and doing gallery shows? That's impressive." "It wasn't a straight path," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "I've hit my share of roadblocks. but I've learned that the only way to keep going is to let the work guide you." His words resonated with her, stirring a mix of admiration and curiosity. What had brought him to this point? What was he searching for? She wanted to ask, but something about his guarded expression made her hold back. They lingered in the cafe long after their cups were empty, talking about everything from favorite artists to childhood memories. Emma found herself opening up in a way that surprised her, sharing stories about her family, her struggles with self-doubt, and her dreams she had long buried under the weight of practicality. Leo listened intently, his gaze steady and encouraging. As they left the cafe, the air outside was thick with the scent of summer freshly cut grass, blooming flowers, and the faint tang of asphalt after a day of heat. Leo walked her to the subway entrance, his hands in his pockets. At the entrance, he paused and looked at her, his gaze steady and sincere. "Emma," he said softly, "I'm glad you came tonight." Her heart fluttered, and she felt the warmth of his words settle in her chest. "Me too." For a moment, it seemed like he might lean in, but he stepped back, his smile warm but reserved. "See you at the next workshop?" She nodded, watching as he walked away into the bustling city. The heat of the summer night wrapped around her, but the warmth in her chest came from something else entirely. Over the following weeks, Emma attended every workshop she could. Each session was a mix of exhilaration and self-discovery, and each time she left the studio, she felt a little closer to understanding herself. Leo's encouragement became a constant, his words pushing her to explore new techniques and subjects. One evening, as the workshop wound down, Leo approached her with a canvas in his hands. It was small, but the vibrant swirls of color caught her eye immediately. I was experimenting with something today," he said, placing it on her table. "And it reminded me of your sketches, the way you play with light and shadow. I thought you might like it." Emma stared at the canvas, speechless. "Leo, this is beautiful." He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "It's just a study, but I wanted you to have it." She ran her fingers lightly over the textured paint, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Thank you. This means a lot." As she walked home that night, the canvas tucked under her arm, she felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, inspiration, and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. The summer unfolded in a blur of sketches, coffee dates, and long conversations. Emma began to see her city through a different lens, the mundane transformed into moments of beauty waiting to be captured. She found herself drawing more often, her confidence growing with each completed piece. One afternoon, Leo invited her to his gallery opening. The space was buzzing with energy, filled with art enthusiasts and fellow artists. Emma wandered through the room, taking in the vivid colors and bold strokes of Leo's work. Each piece felt like a glimpse into his soul, vulnerable, raw, and unapologetically authentic. As she stood in front of a large canvas depicting a stormy coastline, Leo appeared at her side. "What do you think?" "It's incredible," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "The way you've captured the movement of the waves, it feels alive." He smiled, his eyes searching hers. "That's what I love about art. It has the power to make people feel something, to connect us." Emma nodded, her gaze drifting back to the painting. "You've definitely done that." Later that night, as the gallery emptied and the city lights glittered through the windows, Leo pulled her aside. "Emma, I've been thinking. There's a group show coming up at a smaller gallery downtown. I think you should submit some of your work." Her heart raced. "Me? I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." "You are," he said firmly. "Your work deserves to be seen." She hesitated, fear and excitement warring within her. But as she looked into Leo's eyes, she saw something that silenced her doubts. Unwavering belief. That summer, Emma's world began to shift. The studio, the city, and Leo became anchors in her journey, pulling her toward a future she had never dared to imagine. It was a season of sparks, small moments that lit up the darkness, igniting a flame that would change everything. End of Chapter 4. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The kiss in the workshop lingered in Emma's thoughts long after that day. It wasn't just the tenderness of the moment. It was the unspoken understanding that seemed to pass between them. For all of Leo's complexity, for all the weight he carried, he was opening a door, inviting her into a part of his world he hadn't shared with anyone else. But even as they grew closer, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost of Claire would always be with them. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened. They spent hours wandering the city together, from the bustling markets of Chinatown to the quiet cobblestone streets of Greenwich Village. Leo introduced Emma to his favorite spots: a hidden cafe with the best lavender lattes, an independent bookstore where the owner always had a story to tell, and an old jazz club tucked away in a basement that felt like stepping into another era. In turn, Emma shared pieces of herself. She took Leo to the park near her childhood home, where she used to sit for hours, sketching the world around her. She showed him her old journals, filled with dreams and doodles, from a time when she hadn't yet found the courage to pursue art seriously. With every shared moment, they wove a tapestry of connection, each thread more vibrant than the last. But even in the warmth of their growing intimacy, shadows loomed. One evening, as they sat on Emma's fire escape, sipping wine and watching the city lights, Leo grew quiet. His eyes, usually so alive, were distant, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights below. "Sometimes," he said softly, "I still feel like she's here. Not in a haunting way, but like a part of me is always going to belong to her." Emma set her glass down, her heart tightening. She didn't know how to respond, so she waited, giving him the space to continue. "I don't want you to think that means I'm not all in with you," he added, turning to her. "I am. You've made me feel things I didn't think I'd ever feel again. But I also want to be honest. Claire was a huge part of my life, and she always will be." Emma nodded, her throat dry. "I understand," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. How could she compete with a memory? How could she be enough for someone who had already experienced a love so profound it left an indelible mark? Leo reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "I don't want you to feel like you're in her shadow. You're not. You're light, Emma. You're helping me find my way out of the darkness." His words warmed her, but they also added to her uncertainty. She wanted to believe him, to believe that what they were building was strong enough to withstand the weight of his past. But deep down, a small voice whispered doubts she couldn't silence. The next day, Emma threw herself into her art with renewed fervor. She arrived at the workshop early, setting up her easel in a corner flooded with natural light. The canvas in front of her was blank, a stark expanse of white that seemed to mock her hesitation. She wanted to capture the complexity of what she was feeling, the hope, the fear, the love, the doubt, but every stroke felt inadequate. Maya joined her later in the afternoon, her presence a welcome distraction. "You've been quiet lately," she said, pulling up a stool beside Emma. "Everything okay?" Emma sighed, setting her brush down. "It's complicated." Maya tilted her head, studying Emma with the perceptiveness that always made her feel exposed. "Complicated as in relationship stuff?" Emma nodded, chewing her bottom lip. "Leo told me about Claire, about what happened to her, and I get it, you know? I get why she's still such a big part of his life. But it's hard. I don't want to feel like I'm competing with her, but sometimes I do. And then I feel guilty for even thinking that." Maya was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to feel that way," she said finally. "What you're going through is real, and it's valid. But from what you've told me about Leo, it sounds like he's trying. He's being honest with you, which is more than a lot of people would do. The question is, can you accept that part of him? Because if you can't, it's going to eat away at you." Emma stared at her canvas, the swirling mix of emotions reflected in the chaotic colors she'd painted earlier. Could she accept it? Could she truly embrace all of Leo, the man he was now, shaped by the love and loss he'd experienced? That weekend, Leo invited Emma to his apartment for the first time. She'd seen glimpses of his world through his stories and his art, but stepping into his space was something else entirely. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each one packed with novels, art books, and an eclectic mix of trinkets and souvenirs. His studio, tucked into the corner of the living room, was a riot of color and texture, canvases propped against every available surface. As she wandered through the apartment, her eyes landed on a small table near the window. On it was a framed photograph of a woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. Claire. Leo followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That's her," he said quietly. Emma nodded, her throat tightening. "She's beautiful." "She was," he said, his voice tinged with both sadness and fondness. "That photo was taken the day we got engaged. She was so excited. She couldn't stop smiling." Emma turned to him, searching his face for some sign of what he was feeling. "Do you ever think about taking it down?" she asked hesitantly. Leo's brow furrowed, and for a moment, she worried she'd overstepped. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but it doesn't feel right. That photo, it's not just about her. It's about who I was when I was with her. It's a reminder of everything she taught me about love, about life. I don't want to forget that." Emma nodded, her chest heavy. She understood, even if it hurt. Claire wasn't just a memory. She was a part of Leo's foundation, a piece of the puzzle that made him who he was. That night, as they lay in bed, Emma found herself staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She loved Leo. She was sure of that now. But love wasn't always simple. It wasn't just about the moments of joy and connection. It was about navigating the complexities, the challenges, the things that made you question everything. Leo stirred beside her, turning so that his arm draped over her waist. His warmth was comforting, and for a moment, the doubts in her mind quieted. She pressed her hand over his, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, unsure if he was awake enough to hear her. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. His eyes met hers, bleary but full of concern. "Of what?" "Of not being enough," she said, her voice trembling. "Of not being able to compete with what you had with her." Leo cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Emma, you don't have to compete with Claire. What I had with her, it's over. I loved her, and I'll always cherish what we had. But that chapter of my life is closed. You're not a replacement for her. You're someone completely different, and I love you for exactly who you are." Her breath caught. It was the first time he'd said those words, and they landed with a weight she hadn't anticipated. She blinked back tears, her heart swelling with both relief and a new kind of vulnerability. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking. Leo smiled, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "You don't have to carry this alone." As they settled back into bed, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. The doubts were still there, but they were quieter now, tempered by the knowledge that Leo was willing to face them with her. In the days that followed, Emma noticed a change in herself. Her art became bolder, her strokes more confident. She started experimenting with mixed media, layering textures and colors in ways that reflected the complexity of her emotions. Her instructors took notice, praising the vulnerability in her work. One afternoon, as she finished a particularly ambitious piece, Maya walked over and studied the canvas. It was a swirling blend of light and shadow, the shapes abstract but evocative, as if telling a story that words couldn't capture. "That's incredible," Maya said. "It's like you poured your soul into it." Emma smiled, stepping back to admire the piece. "I think I did." She realized then that her relationship with Leo wasn't just shaping her as a person, it was transforming her as an artist. The challenges, the fears, the moments of connection and understanding, they were all part of a larger narrative, one she was still learning to tell. And as she stood there, surrounded by the vibrant chaos of the workshop, Emma felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. End of Chapter 5. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 6, Autumn Decisions. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of change, and with it came a renewed sense of clarity for Emma. The fiery reds and golden yellows of the leaves above her mirrored the warmth she yearned to feel, but also the fragile uncertainty of her heart. She had spent weeks tangled in self-doubt, her emotions swirling like the leaves scattered on the sidewalks. Yet tonight, as the cool air nipped at her skin, she felt a faint ember of hope reignite. After her conversation with Leo at the workshop studio, Emma couldn't help but replay his words in her mind. "You're not a replacement, you're my future." They weren't just comforting, they were grounding, tethering her to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't chasing a ghost. But love was never easy, and neither was healing. The next week brought its share of challenges. Emma still struggled to let her walls down completely. There were moments when Leo's gaze would drift off into the distance, his thoughts likely wandering to memories she could never touch. She would catch herself hesitating, wondering if she could ever truly fit into his life. But then there were also moments of profound connection, like when they stayed up late talking about their childhood dreams, or when Leo surprised her with a sketch he'd drawn of her laughing. "Do I really look like that?" she had asked, holding the paper up to the light, marveling at how effortlessly he'd captured the crinkle in her nose and the light in her eyes. "That's exactly how you look to me," he'd replied, his voice soft but certain. Maya, ever the supportive best friend, didn't let Emma retreat into her overthinking tendencies. One Friday evening, she dragged Emma to a nearby cafe, insisting they needed girl talk. "So you and Leo seem different lately," Maya teased, sipping her chai latte. Emma smirked. "Different how?" "Less I don't know what we are, and more we're figuring it out." Emma rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress the smile creeping onto her lips. "We're better. He's making an effort, and I'm trying to stop doubting everything. It's not perfect, but it feels real." "Good," Maya said, her tone suddenly serious. "Because, Em, you deserve someone who sees you, all of you, and doesn't let you slip through their fingers." That night, as Emma walked home under the amber glow of streetlights, she allowed herself to imagine a future with Leo not just as a fleeting thought, but as a tangible possibility. As the days grew shorter and the air turned sharper, Emma and Leo began carving out a rhythm. They made it a habit to meet at the studio on Wednesday nights, where Emma would sit with her laptop, editing articles, while Leo sketched or painted. The quiet companionship was soothing, a reminder that love didn't always have to be grand gestures and fiery passion. Sometimes it was found in the gentle hum of shared spaces. One evening, as they packed up to leave the studio, Leo reached for Emma's hand. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his voice tinged with anticipation. Curious, Emma followed him to a small storage room at the back of the studio. Inside, Leo flicked on a light, revealing a half-finished mural stretching across the wall. It depicted an abstract forest, the trees painted in swirling hues of red and gold, their branches reaching toward a vivid twilight sky. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, her breath catching. "It's not done yet," Leo said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's inspired by you, by us, the way you've brought color back into my life." Emma's chest tightened, her emotions threatening to spill over. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Leo, I don't know if I'll ever be able to match what you've given me, but I want to try." Leo smiled, his eyes warm. "That's all I need." Autumn slipped into its final days, and with it came a quiet confidence between them. They weren't rushing, they didn't need to. The weight of their shared grief and uncertainty had begun to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing trust. One chilly afternoon, they found themselves at the park again, this time seated on a bench overlooking the lake. Emma pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, glancing at Leo as he stared out at the water. "You know," she began, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd meet someone like you, I don't think I would have believed them." Leo turned to her, his expression soft. "And what about now?" She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Now, I think maybe the universe knows what it's doing after all." The transformation in their relationship wasn't just felt by Emma and Leo, it was visible to others around them. At a dinner party hosted by one of Leo's friends, Emma noticed how at ease he seemed, introducing her to people she didn't know, but who seemed to know everything about her. "So this is the Emma," one of his friends teased, handing her a glass of wine. Emma blushed, glancing at Leo, who shrugged with an unapologetic grin. "He talks about you all the time," the friend continued. "You've really brought him back to life, you know." Later that night, as they walked home under the twinkling city lights, Emma nudged him playfully. "You talk about me, huh?" "Guilty," Leo admitted, slipping his hand into hers. Emma's heart swelled, and she gave his hand a gentle squeeze. But even as they navigated this new chapter together, the shadows of the past lingered. One evening, while they were cooking dinner at Emma's apartment, Leo accidentally knocked over a framed photo on the counter. Emma bent to pick it up, pausing when she saw that it was a picture of Claire and Leo. Her stomach twisted, but she handed it back to him without a word. "I thought I'd put that away," he said softly, setting the photo aside. "It's okay," Emma said, though her voice wavered. "She's part of you, I get that." Leo studied her, his expression conflicted. "Emma, you don't have to pretend it doesn't bother you." She looked away, biting her lip. "It's not that it bothers me, it's just hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting a ghost, and I know it's not fair to you. Or her." Leo reached for her hand, pulling her close. "You're not fighting anyone. Claire will always be a part of my story, but you're the one I'm writing my future with. I mean that." Emma nodded, leaning into him, and as they stood there, wrapped in the warmth of his embrace, she felt a flicker of reassurance. The first snow fell on a quiet Sunday morning. Emma woke to find the world outside her window blanketed in white, the air crisp and still. She made coffee and sat on her couch, watching the snowflakes drift down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Snowball fight at the park in 20 minutes. You in?" Emma laughed, quickly pulling on her coat and scarf. When she arrived, she found Leo already there, a mischievous grin on his face. "You're going down," he declared, scooping up a handful of snow. "Big talk for someone who's about to lose," Emma shot back, gathering her own snowball. Their laughter echoed through the park as they chased each other, their playful rivalry melting into a shared joy that felt pure and unburdened. As they collapsed onto a bench, breathless and rosy-cheeked, Leo turned to her. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but tender, "thank you for giving this a chance, for giving us a chance." Emma smiled, reaching for his hand. Thank you for reminding me that it's okay to let people in. And as the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a soft, quiet promise, Emma felt something shift within her. A belief that love, despite its challenges and imperfections, was worth fighting for. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 7, Falling Together. November arrived with an early snowstorm, the kind that turned the city into a snow globe. White flakes danced through the streets, clinging to trees and ledges, softening the edges of the world. Emma stood by her window, watching the snow swirl and settle. The faint glow of streetlights bounced off the drifts, painting the neighborhood in muted orange and blue hues. She sipped her tea, her hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. There was something both beautiful and isolating about nights like this, perfect for reflection, or in her case, restlessness. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Leo. Leo, workshop canceled. Too much snow. Want some company? Emma hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. She and Leo had been growing closer, but there was a part of her still guarded, unsure how much of herself to let him see. Yet, the idea of spending the evening alone didn't appeal to her. Emma, sure, bring snacks. 20 minutes later, a firm knock sounded at the door. Emma opened it to find Leo standing there, bundled in a thick coat and knit hat, his cheeks pink from the cold. Snowflakes clung to his lashes as he held up a bag of groceries with a triumphant grin. Emergency supplies, he announced. Hot chocolate, popcorn, and marshmallows. I thought we could improvise a movie night. Emma laughed, stepping aside to let him in. You're prepared for everything, aren't you? Years of New York winters, he replied, kicking off his boots and shaking the snow from his coat. Survival Skills 101. Always bring snacks. They settled on the couch, blankets piled high as the snowstorm raged outside. The room filled with the rich aroma of chocolate as Leo prepared the hot drinks in her tiny kitchen. He insisted on doing it himself, melting dark chocolate into milk and adding a sprinkle of cinnamon. Emma took a tentative sip and closed her eyes, savoring the warmth that spread through her. This is amazing, she said, cradling the mug like it was a treasure. You've been holding out on me. Leo shrugged, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. What can I say? I like to keep a few surprises up my sleeve. They chose an old black and white movie from her modest collection, one of those classics where the dialogue was sharp and the chemistry between the leads practically crackled. Emma found herself laughing more than she expected, not just at the film, but at Leo's running commentary. Pickles, her perpetually aloof cat, was another surprise. Usually indifferent to visitors, the little gray tabby wandered over to Leo, sniffing at his outstretched hand before hopping onto the couch and curling up between them. Well, I guess you've officially won her over, Emma said, raising an eyebrow. She doesn't do that for just anyone. What can I say? I'm a charmer, Leo replied, scratching behind Pickle's ears. Halfway through the movie, the power flickered, then cut out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of snow outside the windows. Well, that's a bummer, Emma said, setting her mug down. Leo chuckled. Looks like the universe wants us to go full vintage tonight. Emma used her phone's flashlight to navigate the room. I think I have some candles in the kitchen. Give me a second. Minutes later, the apartment was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, creating a cozy, almost magical atmosphere. They moved to the floor by the coffee table, the popcorn bowl between them. This feels very old school, Emma said, her smile soft. I like it, Leo said, popping a kernel into his mouth. No distractions, just us. His words lingered in the air, heavier than she expected. She looked at him, the candlelight playing across his features, and felt an unfamiliar warmth unfurling in her chest. It wasn't just attraction, it was trust, something she hadn't realized she craved so deeply until now. "Leo," she said, her voice quieter than before. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Do you ever feel scared about starting something new?" He didn't answer right away, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "All the time. But I've learned that being scared isn't a bad thing. It just means it matters." Emma nodded, his words settling in her chest, like a weight she didn't mind carrying. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. He took it without hesitation, his fingers warm against hers. "Being here with you," he said softly, "it doesn't feel scary. It feels right." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to lean into the moment, into him. She leaned closer, their faces inches apart. The world outside the window faded as their lips met in a slow, gentle kiss. It wasn't rushed or demanding, just a quiet acknowledgement of something fragile and precious. When they pulled apart, Emma rested her forehead against his, her breath mingling with his. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," she replied, her smile trembling but genuine. The hours that followed felt timeless. They stayed close, talking in hushed tones, their laughter mingling with the occasional creak of the apartment as the storm continued outside. At one point, Leo shared stories from his childhood winters, snowball fights with his brothers, ice skating on frozen ponds, and the infamous sledding accident that left him with a tiny scar above his eyebrow. Emma listened, captivated, sharing her own memories of snowy days spent building forts and warming up with her grandmother's hot cider. Pickles stayed curled up nearby, a quiet witness to the unfolding intimacy. Eventually, they moved back to the couch, bundling themselves under the blankets. The flickering candles created an illusion of warmth that matched the comfort of being close to one another. "Do you think the power will come back soon?" Emma asked, her voice heavy with drowsiness. Leo shrugged. "Honestly, I kind of hope it doesn't." She looked at him, surprised. "I mean, don't get me wrong. I like modern conveniences as much as the next guy," he said, grinning. "But there's something about this, just us. No distractions, that feels special." Emma couldn't argue with that. As the storm began to ease and the first faint light of dawn crept through the windows, Emma felt a shift. They weren't just two people dancing around their feelings anymore. Something had changed, something she couldn't quite put into words, but felt deeply in her bones. When the power finally flickered back on, she almost resented it. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the overhead lights felt intrusive, breaking the spell of the night. Leo stretched, his arm brushing against hers. "Guess that's our cue to rejoin the modern world." "Do we have to?" she teased, her smile playful but tinged with sincerity. He laughed, pulling her close for a quick kiss. "Not if I have anything to say about it." As he helped her tidy up the remnants of their impromptu evening, Emma realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit before. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something worth holding on to. Leo didn't just bring hot chocolate and popcorn into her home that night. He brought a lightness she hadn't realized she was missing. And as he left later that morning, leaving a trail of footprints in the freshly fallen snow, Emma knew she wasn't just falling for him. She was falling together with him, piece by piece, into something new and beautiful. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 8. Love in Bloom. Spring arrived with a gentle hum of renewal. The snowbanks melted into rivulets that trickled along the curbs, and the city seemed to exhale, stretching into warmer days and brighter skies. Trees budded in timid greens, tulips peeked through freshly thawed soil, and the air carried a hint of warmth mixed with the faint scent of blossoms. For Emma and Leo, The season brought a rhythm they hadn't known before. Their relationship was no longer tentative, but steady, like the blooming flowers in Central Park, fragile, yet undeniably alive. Emma sat at her dining table, her fingers trembling slightly as she reread the email on her laptop screen. The words seemed surreal, almost too good to be true. Her work had been accepted into a group show at a small but well-respected gallery in Soho. It was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about, but never truly believed could happen. "Earth to Emma," Leo teased from across the table, where he was hunched over his sketch pad. His dark curls were a mess, and a faint smudge of charcoal dusted his cheek. "You look like someone handed you a winning lottery ticket." Emma looked up, her cheeks flushing. "It's just, I've never done anything like this before. What if it's a disaster?" Leo set down his pencil and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "It won't be. Your work is incredible, Emma. This is just the beginning." Despite her nerves, Emma couldn't help but smile. Leo's unwavering belief in her made her feel like anything was possible. His words were steadying, like a bridge holding firm in a storm. The weeks leading up to the exhibit were a blur of preparation. Emma spent countless hours in Leo's studio, framing her pieces, tweaking small details, and agonizing over which sketches to include. The air in the studio was thick with the smell of paint and the hum of quiet determination. Leo was always there, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply working on his own projects, but always present in a way that gave her a sense of calm. One evening, as she packed up her brushes and canvas boards, Emma noticed a large, unfinished piece propped against the far wall. It was different from Leo's usual workless polished, more raw and emotive. The image depicted the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, but the colors were soft and warm, almost dreamlike. Emma paused, captivated. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "It feels personal." Leo walked over, his steps quiet on the wooden floor. "It is," he admitted, his tone unusually soft. "I painted it after our first workshop together. You inspired it." Her heart swelled, her chest tightening with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Me?" He nodded, his gaze lingering on the painting. "You see the world in a way that makes it feel alive. I wanted to capture that." Emma turned to him, overwhelmed by the vulnerability in his words. She placed her hand on his arm, squeezing gently. "Thank you." Leo met her gaze, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, humming with unspoken feelings. It was a quiet but profound moment, one that Emma would carry with her as she prepared for the biggest night of her life. The night of the exhibit arrived, and Emma felt like a live wire, her nerves jangling with every step she took into the gallery. The space was intimate but elegant, the walls lined with pieces from artists she couldn't believe she was exhibiting alongside. Soft lighting illuminated the artwork, and the low hum of conversation filled the room as visitors wandered through. Emma stood beside her collection sketches and paintings, inspired by the city's vibrancy and quiet beauty. She tried not to fidget, her fingers clutching a glass of wine Leo had pressed into her hand earlier. "You're doing great," Leo said from beside her. His dark blazer and crisp white shirt made him look effortlessly handsome, but his smile was what truly calmed her. "I feel like I'm going to pass out," she admitted, taking a sip of the wine. "You're not," he said, his tone laced with affection. "You're shining." His confidence in her was a lifeline, and Emma found herself standing a little taller as the evening wore on. Guests stopped by to admire her work, offering compliments and asking thoughtful questions that reminded her of why she loved art in the first place. Each interaction was like a small victory, chipping away at her self-doubt. By the end of the night, the gallery owner approached her with a warm handshake and a promise to keep an eye on her future projects. The weight of the evening's success began to sink in, filling Emma with a quiet, triumphant pride. When the last guest had left, Leo took her hand and led her outside. The cool spring air was a welcome relief after the heat of the gallery, and the city lights sparkled against the inky sky. "See?" he said, his voice soft. "I told you this was just the beginning." Emma laughed, leaning into him. "I guess I'll have to start believing you." "You should," he teased, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm always right." She rolled her eyes, but her smile didn't waver. Standing there on the cobblestone street, with Leo's arm around her and the weight of her accomplishments settling in, Emma felt something she hadn't in a long time: contentment. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Emma's career began to take off. Her work gained attention online and in smaller art circles, leading to new opportunities and collaborations. Despite her success, she remained grounded, leaning on Leo for support as she navigated the unfamiliar waters of recognition. Their relationship deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. They spent lazy Sunday mornings sketching together in the park, cooked messy, impromptu dinners in Emma's tiny kitchen, and explored the city with an intimacy that made it feel like their own private world. But they weren't without challenges. Emma's insecurities occasionally resurfaced, manifesting as doubts about her ability to sustain her success. Meanwhile, Leo had his own struggles moments, where he withdrew into himself, wrestling with the pressure of his own expectations. Despite these moments, they always found their way back to each other. They learned to talk through their fears, to share their burdens rather than carrying them alone. One afternoon, Leo surprised Emma with a mural he'd been working on in secret. It covered an entire wall of his studio, a vibrant, sprawling depiction of the city as Emma saw it. Glowing lights, bustling streets, and small, intimate moments captured in breathtaking detail. "This is how you see the world," Leo said, standing beside her as she took it all in. "And it's how I see you." Emma stared at the mural, tears welling in her eyes. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Leo, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Just know that you've changed my life." As Emma rested her head against his chest, she realized that their love wasn't about erasing the past or ignoring their scars. It was about building something new, something beautiful, from everything they'd been through. Their love, like the spring around them, was a testament to renewal. A reminder that even after the harshest winters, life could bloom again. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 9, The First Winter. By the time winter rolled around again, Emma and Leo's relationship had settled into something comfortable yet dynamic, a steady rhythm punctuated by shared moments of inspiration and creativity. They had built a life together that was uniquely theirs, blending their passions, vulnerabilities, and quirks into a mosaic neither of them had imagined a year ago. Emma stood in her apartment, nervously adjusting the hem of her dress. Tonight was her first solo exhibition, an evening dedicated entirely to her work. The gallery had reached out after seeing her pieces in the group show, and while she was thrilled, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. Every stroke of her brush, every hour of doubt in front of a blank canvas had led to this night. Yet now that it was here, it felt surreal. "Stop fussing," Maya said from the couch, where she was scrolling through her phone. "You look incredible. Leo's going to be speechless." Emma gave her a look, one brow raised. "This isn't about Leo." "Sure it's not," Maya teased, smirking. "But let's not pretend his opinion doesn't matter." Emma sighed but couldn't help smiling. "Fine, let's go before I lose my nerve." The gallery was buzzing when they arrived. Soft lighting highlighted Emma's work, and clusters of visitors wandered from piece to piece, murmuring appreciatively. She had chosen her pieces carefully, each one a slice of her life, a snapshot of moments she had cherished or struggled through. There was the moody sketch of Elliot's cafe at dusk, where she had first begun to sketch strangers in earnest, and the sweeping pastel of the riverbend she and Leo had visited in spring. Each piece carried a story, a memory etched into its colors. Emma hovered near the back, overwhelmed by the sight of strangers admiring her art. She couldn't tell if their murmurs were genuine or if they were just being polite, and the doubt gnawed at her. "You should mingle," Maya said, giving her a gentle nudge. "This is your night." Before Emma could respond, her heart skipped a beat. She saw Leo step through the door. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he had hurried to get there. But what caught her attention most was the way his face lit up when he spotted her. He moved through the crowd with ease, stopping in front of one of her larger pieces, the cafe sketch. He studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes soft but intent. "Emma," he said, his voice low and warm, "this is incredible." Her cheeks flushed, the weight of his gaze almost too much to bear. "You're just saying that because you have to." "I don't have to do anything," he said, his tone playful but sincere. "I'm saying it because it's true." They spent the rest of the evening together, Leo staying by her side as she talked to gallery patrons and answered questions about her work. His presence steadied her, his quiet confidence somehow infectious. Whenever she hesitated, a quick glance at him seemed to remind her that she belonged here. As the last guests trickled out, the gallery owner approached Emma with a broad smile. "We'd love to feature more of your work in the future. Tonight was a huge success." Emma thanked her, though the words felt distant, surreal. She couldn't quite process them. When the owner walked away, Leo pulled her into a quiet corner of the room. The gallery was nearly empty now, the quiet amplifying the moment. "You did it," he said, his hands resting on her shoulders. His eyes, dark and earnest, searched hers. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "I am, but I couldn't have done it without you." "That's not true," he said firmly. "This was all you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the evening, the culmination of so much hard work and self-doubt, hung between them. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "Thank you, Leo, for everything, for always believing in me, even when I couldn't." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Always." The city was quiet and peaceful as they strolled through the snow-covered streets, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the pristine white ground. Leo held her hand as they walked, their breath visible in the cold air. The silence between them wasn't awkward but companionable, the kind of silence that spoke volumes without the need for words. I feel like my life has completely changed this year," Emma said, her voice soft. She looked up at the sky, where snowflakes drifted lazily. "It's scary sometimes, but it's also amazing." Leo stopped walking, gently tugging her hand so she would turn to face him. "You've changed my life too, Emma, more than I can put into words." There was a weight in his voice, a vulnerability that caught her off guard. He had been her rock throughout the year, always steady, always sure. To hear him speak like this, to hear the unspoken emotions in his words, was both surprising and deeply moving. She reached up, brushing a snowflake from his hair. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm trying to say thank you," he said, his voice steady but soft. "For seeing me, for letting me see you. I didn't think I'd feel this way again, but here we are." Emma smiled, tears threatening to spill. "Here we are." As the snow fell around them, Leo leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss, but it felt like the beginning of something even deeper. Emma held onto him, the cold forgotten, the city around them a blur of lights and snow. That night, as they sat in her apartment, sipping hot chocolate and watching the snow outside her window, Emma felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The doubts that had haunted her, the fears that had held her back, felt distant now. She looked over at Leo, who was leaning back on the couch, his fingers laced through hers. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I used to think love had to be this big, dramatic thing, like in the movies. But with you, it's not like that at all." He raised a brow, his lips curving into a small smile. "Oh? And what's it like with me?" "Yeah, it's steady," she said after a moment, her voice thoughtful. "It's grounding. It's messy and full of uncertainties, but it's also real. It feels like home." Leo's smile softened, and he squeezed her hand. "You're my home too, Emma." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, but it wasn't from sadness or fear. It was from gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Winter stretched on, the city transforming into a snow-covered wonderland. Emma and Leo found joy in the season's simple pleasures, building snowmen in the park, sharing hot cider at the holiday market, and curling up under blankets to watch old movies. Each day brought new challenges and new moments of connection, weaving their lives together in ways neither of them had expected. One evening, as they walked through the park after a fresh snowfall, Leo suddenly stopped and pulled her close. "What are you doing?" Emma laughed, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Dance with me?" he said, grinning. "Here, in the snow?" "Why not?" He took her hands and began to hum a tune, spinning her gently on the snow-dusted path. At first, she laughed and protested, but soon she gave in, letting herself be swept up in the moment. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the quiet magic of the falling snow. As they swayed together under the winter sky, Emma realized that these small, imperfect moments, was what love was really about. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet, everyday ways they showed up for each other. And in that moment, with Leo's arms around her and the snow falling softly, she knew she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Seasons of Emma, Chapter 10. The Seasons Ahead. The snow had melted, giving way to the first tentative blooms of spring. The city, once blanketed in white silence, now buzzed with the awakening of life. Central Park stretched before them, alive with the hum of renewal, the soft rustle of budding leaves, the distant laughter of children, and the chatter of joggers passing by. The air carried the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of early flowers, a promise of the warmth to come. Emma and Leo walked hand in hand, their steps unhurried as though savoring each moment. A year had passed since their first meeting at Elliot's Cafe, but the memory of that snowy evening lingered in their minds, sharp and vivid. It felt both like a lifetime ago and as recent as yesterday. So much had changed since then, and yet the essence of their connection remained unchanged, steady, transformative, and undeniably theirs. Emma paused at a park bench under a blooming magnolia tree, sitting down and pulling Leo with her. The bench had a clear view of the city skyline, bathed in golden afternoon light that turned the glassy skyscrapers into shimmering monoliths. "This feels like the perfect place to celebrate," she said, her lips curling into a smile. Leo raised an eyebrow, curious. "Celebrate what exactly?" Without a word, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a folded flyer. She handed it to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she bit her lip, unable to contain her anticipation. Leo unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the bold lettering. As he read, his face transformed, a mixture of awe, pride, and sheer joy. "Your solo show at the Met," he said, looking at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Emma, this is incredible." She nodded, her excitement bubbling over. "I got the email this morning. I wanted you to be the first to know." Setting the flyer aside, Leo pulled her into a tight embrace. His arms were warm and reassuring, his voice soft when he whispered into her hair, "I'm so proud of you. You deserve this more than anyone." When they pulled apart, Emma searched his eyes, her own glistening with unshed tears. "I wouldn't have done it without you, Leo. You gave me the courage to believe in myself again." Leo smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe, but the talent? That was always yours. All I did was remind you it was there." The next few months passed in a blur of preparation for Emma's show. Days turned into nights as she poured herself into her work, each piece a reflection of the journey she had been on, her struggles, triumphs, and the love that had carried her through. The collection was a tapestry of her life, intimate sketches of the city that had both challenged and inspired her, vibrant paintings of Elliot's Cafe, where her story with Leo began, and deeply personal pieces that captured her moments of vulnerability and growth. The opening night at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was everything Emma had dreamed of and more. The Grand Gallery was alive with the murmur of admiration as visitors wandered from piece to piece, marveling at her work. Each stroke of her brush and each pencil line spoke volumes, resonating deeply with the audience. Leo was by her side the entire evening, his quiet pride evident in the way he looked at her. While others congratulated her and admired her talent, it was Leo's presence that anchored her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, as though to remind her he was there. When the night finally wound down, they returned to her favorite spot, the rooftop of her apartment building. It was their sanctuary, a place where they often went to talk, dream, and simply be. The stars twinkled above them like scattered diamonds, while the city hummed below, its lights stretching endlessly into the night. Leo pulled a small box from his pocket, holding it out to her without a word. Emma's breath hitched as she opened it, revealing a delicate silver bracelet adorned with a single charm, a tiny, intricately detailed sketchbook. "For everything you've created," he said, his voice steady, "and for everything you will create. I wanted you to have something to remind you of how far you've come." Emma slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, her fingers trembling slightly. "Leo, it's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. For a long moment, they sat in silence, leaning against each other as the cool breeze swept across the rooftop. The city's lights glittered in the distance, a reminder of the world they had both conquered and embraced together. "What's next?" Emma asked eventually, her voice soft and thoughtful. Leo smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Whatever we want, together." Spring turned into summer, and their days were filled with a rhythm that felt both effortless and exhilarating. They explored the city's hidden corners, seeking out quiet bookstores, cozy cafes, and new adventures. Emma's art blossomed in new directions, her confidence growing with each passing day. Leo, too, found himself inspired, his work as a photographer reflecting the joy and wonder he felt in their life together. One evening, as the summer sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the streets in a golden glow, Emma and Leo found themselves at Elliot's Cafe. It had become a tradition of sorts, a place where they returned to remind themselves of where it all began. They sat at their usual table by the window, the warm light painting their faces with soft hues. "Do you ever think about that night?" Emma asked, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "Every day," Leo replied without hesitation. "It's funny, isn't it? How one moment can change everything." Emma nodded, her gaze distant as she thought back to that snowy evening. "I almost didn't go that night. I was so caught up in my own world, so sure that nothing would ever change." "And now?" Leo asked, his eyes searching hers. "Now," Emma said, smiling softly. "I can't imagine my life any other way." As summer gave way to autumn, the city transformed once again. The leaves turned fiery shades of red and gold, and the air grew crisp. Emma and Leo often walked through the park, their conversations weaving effortlessly between the present and the future. They spoke of dreams yet to be realized, places they wanted to visit, and the life they envisioned building together. One particularly breezy afternoon, they found themselves on the steps of the Met, watching the world go by. Emma's show had concluded weeks earlier, but its success still lingered in her mind, a reminder of what was possible. "Do you ever wonder what's waiting for us?" she asked, leaning her head against Leo's shoulder. "Not really," he admitted. "I've stopped worrying about what's ahead. As long as we're together, I know it'll be good." Emma smiled, her heart full as she looked out at the bustling city. For so long, she had been searching for meaning, for connection, for herself. And now, sitting beside Leo, she realized she had found all of it and more. The seasons ahead were a mystery, but she wasn't afraid of what they might bring. Life, after all, was messy and unpredictable. It was full of unexpected challenges and moments of pure, unadulterated joy. And so, Emma and Leo continued to write their story, a story of love, resilience, and the art of finding beauty in everything. The snow would fall again, and spring would return, bringing with it new beginnings. But no matter what the seasons held, they knew they would face them together, hand in hand, as they always had.
End of Chapter 10 and end of story.
Thank you for listening.
Make sure to check our other free audiobooks at 10 Chapters Audiobooks on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast.